9, 12, 10, 28, 2, 23.
This is Deep State Radio.
Hello and welcome to DSR. I'm David Rothkopf, your host, joined by some of our esteemed regulars, including the prescient and always pessimistic Rosa Brooks of Georgetown University Law Center. How are you, Rosa?
Depressed.
Depressed?
No fun being prescient, David.
No, it's no fun. It's no fun when you're right. But I have to tell you, since I was hugely wrong, that's not fun either. We also have with us man of the people from the Financial Times, Ed Luce. How are you today?
I've seen better days, thank you, David.
Well, you get to a certain age. That's true for everybody. And speaking of age, we we have with us as you can tell from the laugh, our good friend David Sanger of the New York Times. How are you, David?
Well, it was a different atmosphere last night than it was in 2016 in the newsroom of the New York Times. I'd have to say there was less shock.
There was less shock.
Less shock. Yeah.
Yeah. Interesting. Well, let's just go around. I'm going to do this in the traditional way we do it, which is to put Rosa last so that she can react to everybody's comments and pull herself together. Ed, just give me your reaction. How was your night, Ed?
It was long. It was sort of drip, worse and worse as it went on. You had that feeling right at the beginning, the direction it would go, and then all sorts of mental tricks you play on yourself to find some county, drill down into some precinct where, Kamala was doing slightly better than Biden in 2020. Basically con yourself until it was no longer possible. So it was a deeply, deeply depressing night on many, many levels. And this is just the beginning of it.
Yeah, I mean, as listeners can imagine, I'm getting texts from Ed throughout the evening going, "Well, you thought everything was going to be fine. Boy, did you screw up."
That is not fair. That is not fair.
It's sort of fair. No, it's not. It's not. I own my irrational exuberance. David, I know you've written something on the consequences of this, but let's just put you on the couch too and talk about how you felt last night.
So, it's interesting because going into this, all of us were coming up with scenarios in which either one could go win. And my instinct had told me that Harris would pull it out barely. And of course that was wrong, but then I was reminded by many that my instinct had been that when Trump went down the escalator, he would stay in the race for about 3 weeks. And then my instinct was that Clinton would probably beat him. And then my instinct was that he might survive in 2020 when Biden beat him. So I think it's fair to say that I have an absolutely perfect and unblemished record here of being wrong.
I love your honesty. It's obviously why we're friends. I have a long record of getting these things wrong. The first person I ever voted for was John Anderson. I was a big supporter of the Paul Tsongas campaign. It was very good. I was actually the policy director of the Evan Bayh for President campaign, another huge success.
Wait, David, you voted against Carter re-election.
Yes, okay. I did. Yes, I did. I was very young. And, and I have to say, because I had been sort of an early supporter of Kamala Harris, the period from July 21st through yesterday was just unprecedented in my life. People would come up to me and say, "Oh, you have such insight." Yeah, right. It was like, "Oh my God, you're so smart, and you're so confident that she's going to win. I love listening to you." And now, I'm getting little things like, do you need counseling, and how could how wrong could you be?
David, I just want you to know that all of your friends here at Deep State Radio thought that you were wrongheaded on many things prior to any of all of that.
Thank you.
So we've been way out ahead of the game.
Thank you. Well, you spend 10 years talking to each other every week. There's many opportunities. Anyway, Rosa, how was your evening?
Oh, my evening was depressing. I had my children were with me, and my younger daughter cast her first vote in the presidential election yesterday for Kamala Harris, and it was a pretty demoralizing evening all around. That being said, I one of the things that strikes me, I know you've all been talking about your feelings, and I care about you, and I care about your feelings, but let's not talk about our feelings anymore, because one of the things that really strikes me in this is that the kind of discourse, the culture wars discourse from the GOP was very successful. And they were not 100% wrong that the sort of tone of the progressive discourse, what they caricatured as, wokeness, which was unfair in a gazillion ways, et cetera. But the sort of combination of sort of sanctimoniousness and sort of preciousness, and now we should all go, schools, universities with Lego rooms and puppies for students to pat because they're so distraught about the election. Like, can we just stop it with that crap? I mean, no. Your feelings, take about 37 seconds to sit with your feelings, and then let's move on because we have shit to do, people. We can't. There's a kind of a desire to wallow that I don't think any of us can afford, and it's fairly unattractive to begin with. I'm not, of course, accusing any of you of being wallowers. None of you would ever do any such thing, but that's out there, right? We see that's out there. It's been out there for years. It's out there right now. My own university got mocked in the press for having a little, a Lego room for the master's degree students to go hang out in if they were too distraught to do anything.
That was a pretty funny story, Rosa, I do have to say. That David and I, we have a particular thing about puppies, so I don't want to hear a whole lot.
I'm very pro puppy. I'm extremely. I want it to be on record that I am pro puppy. But if you have an actual 4-year-old, let them go play Legos to distract themselves from the world and its woes. But if anybody is over the age of approximately 9, talk to them about the world and how we need to go out and do work in it. And these are moments that should be galvanizing. To quote the great labor leader Joe Hill, great labor hero Joe Hill, don't mourn, organize.
Whoa, that's bracing. Ed, you must really relate to this because it is so British, stiff upper lip. Get on with it. Keep calm. Carry on. Is that the advice? Is that the lesson you're taking out of this? Or, are there lessons you're taking out of this at this point?
Well, I'm sort of split. I'm part of me is from the older British stiff upper lip upbringing for sure. But the death of Diana introduced the quivering lower lip, and so my lips are not in agreement.
Lips are moving in different directions. I see.
Yeah,
that.
it's a very weird. It requires physical training actually.
It does make it hard.
At the same time. But you purged all wallowingness out of my system, Rosa, and reminded me that there are bigger issues here, and that the organizing and the I guess the oversight, the questioning, the monitoring, the scrutiny of what's already happening, which is a transition to an unprecedented challenge for American democracy, should begin now. And so I couldn't agree with you more. And I applaud the work you've done on Trump's first 100 days, the various war-style scenario games that you've been playing that have looked at the kinds of things.
Please don't say war-style scenario games, Ed. Please don't say war-style scenario games.
Yeah, war scenarios.
MAGA already think that I am leading an insurrection.
You're right. I'm getting the sequence of words there. War scenario style games about the first 100 days.
Okay, she's going to the gulag now. And it's on you, Ed.
No. I mean, and the way that you brought out what was really positive about Trump, which is what I was about to say, and therefore, Rosa, you should be safe in the new regime.
Wow. David, before the next round, I promise, is going to be longer term implications of all of this. But just do you, from your gut, which, as we've already established, is a superbly tuned instrument on political issues, do you sort of see a lesson that, you would just sort of say, well, the Democrats take this away from all this?
I guess the big lesson is this. The first time that Trump was elected, I think there was, in the bubble of deep state radio listeners and many others, a sense that the country maybe didn't know exactly who they were voting for, had convinced themselves that the responsibilities of the job would change him, and so forth and so on. But by 2020, and certainly by this election, 34 convictions in.
You say that like it's a big number.
So many other, things that we had learned about January 6th, about Trump's decision-making style, about so much that he was doing. There's not a human being in the country that didn't know exactly who they were voting for. And so, maybe the problem here is that we have insufficiently understood the nature of the attraction for Trump, and that what we needed to go do was rethink more about what we thought that Biden and Harris and others were accomplishing, how they cast what they were accomplishing, and why it is that this was so thoroughly rejected. And by the way, the polling was off. It wasn't off by that much, but it turned out that the polls that we thought were outlier polls, including the New York Times Siena polls, which were pretty negative for Harris, turned out to be right.
Yeah, well, there is that. Although every single separate insight that people had in the week on the run up, she's going to benefit from the gender gap. Women are going to stand up for her. She's going to do better with young voters. She's going to get the crossover voters from the Republicans, the Liz Cheney voters. She's got the energy. He doesn't have the energy, et cetera. All those things had no effect. They were all wrong. Mm-hmm. Every single one of them. And some of the things that were not expected, like Latin men, were going to go heavy against her, came as surprises. All right. Well, let's turn our attention to implications of all of this. And Rosa, you've thought a lot about one set of implications, which is how does one act in opposition to a government like this? And, the first question, I guess, is, should you assume the worst? I mean, for example, I heard RFK Jr. today, who Trump has promised to put in charge of lots of our health issues. Somebody said, well, are you going to ban vaccines? And he said, no, you should have any vaccine you want. I just want to make sure you've got access to really good science, something he knows a lot about. And so I thought, well, maybe it's not so bad. Maybe we should give them a chance. And only when they start doing bad things, we should dig in our heels. Or should we assume the worst, Rosa, and plan for it?
Well, both, right? I mean, hope for the best, prepare for the worst. Here's the most optimistic scenario. Optimistic scenario, and I was just discussing this with some of my colleagues from the Democracy Futures Project, is that these are just a bunch of kleptocrats, and they really do not care about anything other than lining their pockets and doing favors for their corporate cronies, and all the rest is sort of gravy. And Trump has these little, childish impulses to punish people here and there, and maybe they'll indulge him. People around him might indulge him every now and then on a few things, but they don't really care if they send, Liz Cheney to Guantanamo or not. They need to keep Trump happy. They're going to feed him hamburgers. They're going to throw him the occasional bit of red meat, political red meat. But basically, they're just going to engage in wholesale looting of our system, using the tools of government to send profits their way. And the rest is kind of irrelevant to them, and after them the deluge and so forth. And that would kind of be the best case scenario, that they loot for a while, they line their pockets, they ensure political immunity and pardons for all, and then they go away fat and happy. And that could happen. It wouldn't. In my general approach is that nothing would totally shock me. But I think at the same time we have to be prepared for two other possibilities. One is that the ideologues take power and they're serious, and Trump gives them head. He doesn't, excuse me, I didn't mean to say that way. He gives them their head. Maybe both.
So many responses, particularly following Trump's display with that microphone the other day. But go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, Riley should edit that one out. The Trump gives them plenty of room on that one. And they go all shock and awe. They try to detain 15 million migrants at the same time. They try to fire 100,000 civil servants at the same time. They try to put 30 people from Trump's first cabinet into Guantanamo, and it generates an enormous backlash, because even many of the Trump voters who thought, oh, it's all bluster. Of course, he's not really going to do that. I just am voting for him because I think he's going to somehow magically lower inflation or whatever. And there's a huge backlash, and they actually have to retreat a little bit. That's a possibility. And then the third possibility, the one that actually frightens me most, as you know, is the sort of a combination of kleptocracy plus careful, competent, little by little, let's make examples out of some key people until everybody else is cowering and we quietly slide into autocracy.
Okay, Ed, what do you think are the implications of this? If you're sending a message domestically or internationally, to advise people to prepare themselves, what should they prepare themselves for?
I'm tempted to just agree with everything Rosa has said and leave it at that. But I mean, there is an additional factor with Trump, which his many world leaders who were around when he was there last time are familiar with, and that is he is unpredictable. He can, I think we've discussed this before. Okay, he's telegraphed that there will be a global trade war, 20% and 60% tariff rates, respectively, on the world and then China. But he's quite capable of receiving a call from Xi Jinping in 3 weeks, and Xi promising to buy several $1 trillion, and him saying, yeah, great. Even if the several $1 trillion is a complete chimera, and it's just a fake deal. Trump likes deals. That is who he believes he is, the guy who gets deals others can't get. And so that could work. That could work unpredictably to the world's advantage if it sort of prevents a Smoot-Hawley kind of, self-induced return to a depression. It could work very, very well for somebody like Putin. I think if there is a silver lining, a Kamala Harris victory would have led to continued complacency and inaction in terms of European integration and getting its act together on defense. This could sort of this could really galvanize more European action. So that's a potentially very distinct silver lining from this. Is we cannot rely on an America that has re-elected Trump. We know that the second time is not an accident. America is now permanently ruptured from its post-war world. We must prepare as though it will never come back. And we also have an urgent situation to address in Ukraine, because Zelensky is not going to fold. He's not just going to sort of hear Trump clicking his fingers and conclude, oh, that's it. My people will agree that all of this was for nothing. So I guess the unpredictability is one thing, but How do you hedge? Well, you suck up. And that's what we're going to see a ton of. That's what diplomats are paid to do. Governments see a strange Lovian quality to Trump. And, they'll want to get on his good side. And what is it that he likes? Well, he likes not just flattery, but he likes deals. Is Europe really prepared to go to a trade war with Trump? I doubt it, because it would come out, we'll all, including Americans, come out poorer from it. But he's got tons of leverage right now. And there will therefore be tons of deals.
I don't know if you guys spoke in advance, but in the middle of that answer, David, Ed seemed to tee up your piece that you just posted extremely neatly. So thank you, Ed. On David's behalf, perhaps you would like to discuss the piece, David.
So the argument I made was essentially what you just heard from Ed, which is at the moment that Donald Trump gets elected for the second time, the rest of the world has to conclude that the post-World War II experiment in American leadership, American free trade, American conviction that it's going to be the center of NATO is over. It might turn out that they'll be happily surprised, but if I was a vulnerable NATO state that was relying entirely on the United States for everything from my nuclear umbrella to just conventional defense, I'd be working on a plan B today. If I was Zelensky and I was fearful of getting that phone call in which Trump says, I just spoke to Vladimir Putin, and we think we've got a really great deal for you. You give up 20% of the country, and we can continue sending you some aid. Or you don't give up 20% of the country, and we'll have to cut off your aid until we negotiate this. So a lot of dynamics have changed here. I also think Ed's right that the first instinct that Xi Jinping is going to have is that if you dangle the correctly sized trade deal in front of Donald Trump, even if he doesn't really intend to carry through with it, that might buy him an awful lot. And one of the many things that bothered me about the campaign on both sides, both the Trump side and the Harris side, was that there was really no significant discussion of the complexity of dealing with China, China's rise, its military rise, its economic troubles, its technological ambitions, other than the tariff plan, as if the tariff was going to somehow solve all of these bigger issues. And that's on the Trump side, but I also didn't hear Harris come up with a plan on China, which is the one foreign policy issue that most touches the economic lives of most Americans.
Rosa, I was talking to a very knowledgeable observer of world affairs just a little while ago. And
the three of us.
Yeah, like the three of you. And he was saying, well, I'm worried about Ukraine, I'm worried about Taiwan, I'm worried about South Korea. And I said, well, the Europeans could back up Ukraine. They could do it on their own. They could just sort of say, we're not going to follow the same path as the U.S. The question is, would they want to get into sort of, dust up with Trump over this? The South Koreans can defend themselves from North Korea pretty well. And I think the North Koreans know that. I don't know that the North Koreans would be tempted to do anything except periodic provocations. And with regard to Taiwan, well, it could go either way. On the one hand, Trump could say, well, good trade deal, fine, have your Taiwan. I don't really care about it, because I don't think he cares. On the other hand, there could be people in the GOP that are real China hawks who say, no, boss, don't go there. That's not a good one. And he works out a way to postpone that during his term of office, which is really all he's going to care about. It's possible, and I've read some articles in places like Foreign Policy and so forth, where people go, well, Trump foreign policy, it's not going to be the same as Biden foreign policy. But, it's not going to be catastrophic. Where do you come out on
What?
that? Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I come out where David began, which is that he's extremely unpredictable. That's the only thing we can say with certainty about Trump, and that unpredictability is what he characterizes foreign policy. We know that he seems to make decisions based on, what he just watched on Fox, who just called him, what kind of mood he is in, whether he's hungry or not, whether he just got a love letter from a foreign dictator, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's anybody's guess. I mean, it could, as I said, it could be relatively stable. He could be up eating hamburgers and not really paying attention, and he delegates it all to some people who don't really care that much, or he delegates it all to a bunch of China hawks or whatever. It could also be totally erratic and weird, and dangerous and scary. I do suspect that Ukraine is basically toast, given 4 years of Trump. I think any American who believed that not voting for Kamala Harris was somehow going to end up being good for the Palestinians or the Jews is going to be in for an unpleasant surprise. But other than that, I have no idea.
Ed, what's your sense? Is the threat Trump poses more to the U.S. and the U.S. system, or is there an equivalent threat from Trump foreign policy?
It's much, much more to the U.S. system. That's where 90% of my concern lies. I think we already live in a very unstable world, and I would question some of Biden's handling of it. Not just the Middle East, where I've been quite critical, but I think he's actually been too cautious on Ukraine and on China. Started off too hawkish and is now in a better place, but not a very dynamic one. So, the criticism that Biden, didn't really return the US to a normal role is a perfectly fair one, even though he probably was not into a position to do so. We are living in a different world. It is becoming multipolar. So I think the threat is really to the US system. And to constitutional norms here and the rule of law here, and to people on Trump's enemies list, and not just his enemies list, but the enemies lists of the various minions, the Kash Patels, the Eric Grinnells, the Stephen Millers, and the various others who we are bound to be seeing taking prominent roles in this administration. There will be an enabling climate, the global effect of this, just the sort of ease with which he will be able to, now that he's been supercharged and empowered by a Supreme Court on two levels, not just the immunity ruling in June, but the Chevron ruling that'll enable him to. Remember, Steve Bannon promised to deconstruct the administrative state. Well, he's going to get someone like Elon Musk in, to sort of basically gut regulatory agencies. The ease with which America will make sort of mincemeat of a lot of essential norms and guardrails is, I think, going to have as big an effect globally as whatever foreign policy Trump pursues. It will empower equivalent forces in other democracies. It'll empower the AfD. It'll empower the Front National in France. Giorgia Meloni of Italy is really happy today, I would imagine. Putin is, of course, delighted. Orban is like, the new popular guy on the global scene, and Netanyahu is, of course, it's another reprieve for him. I'm not downplaying the sort of Trump foreign policy potential ability to destabilize things. I think we live in an unstable world anyway, but the sort of demonstration effect of what can be done to U.S. democracy and its impact on others is a really important factor of this.
Of course, David, those two intersect, right?
Yes.
Russia ran disinformation operations to support Trump. Russia apparently was behind some of the bomb threats yesterday that disrupted voting. There are undoubtedly ways that Russia helped support the Trump candidacy that we're not aware of. Trump is in contact with Putin, he says. Musk is in contact with Putin. J.D. Vance is kind of enamored of Putin. How do you think the U.S.-Russia relationship changes in the midst of all of this?
It's a really great question because, our temptation is to think that Trump will just pick this up where he left it off, which was to say, what's the matter with having a good relationship with Russia? And he respects me so much he never would have invaded Ukraine if I'd been president, or when he was president, he said he hadn't. And therefore, Trump will think he's in a position to negotiate a solution here. My concern is not necessarily giving up the 20% of Ukraine. My guess is in any negotiated solution, Ukraine's probably going to have to go give up some land. The question is whether this is a Ukrainian decision or whether this is an American decision forced down their throats. And that's a very different thing and a very important distinction. The hard part here, I think, is going to be Trump managing the Russia-China relationship, because he did not deal with this when he was president. It was not in the condition that it is in today. And he's obviously, as we've discussed here, has a very different relationship with the Chinese than he does with the Russians. And be interesting to see whether he even thinks it is in America's interest to try to disrupt that relationship, which President Biden did say at his last news conference after the NATO summit that he thought it was. Taiwan's a really interesting question, because if I was Xi Jinping, I think I'd come to the conclusion pretty quickly that Donald Trump probably didn't care that much about Taiwan. And I think everything that's happened in the past 24 hours could deeply affect Xi's calculus about when to put more pressure on Taiwan.
Rosa, as we look at this, one of the things that is tied up in it, it falls into your other area of expertise, which is the legal. I saw our friend Susan Glasser tweeted something out saying, if Merrick Garland had gone after Trump early on in this thing, he would have been a retiree shouting at the TV at this point, not actually, a viable candidate. Don't know if that's true, but the Justice Department today announced that they're going to be winding down the federal cases against Trump. Trump is already sort of hitting the brakes on state cases against him, saying that they can't proceed. There is this immunity doctrine that is now in place. It seems to me that the rule of law, and specifically the ability of the chief executive to become a law unto himself, is one of the great problems here, particularly with regard to your comment about kleptocracy.
Yeah. Yep.
Well, then, do you care to elaborate? No.
I mean, there's not a lot more to say. It's really devastating. This is absolutely devastating. And the single best thing that can be said about the American people, the single most generous thing I think I can think of to say about the many American people who voted for Donald Trump, is that they were misguided or really weren't paying attention, because this is absolutely devastating and it will hurt all of us in the longer run. It will hurt them in the longer run. And it's just terrible. The only thing I do think, I think it's worth saying, I'm dismayed by how much energy in the news, the media, Twitter, you name it, is going towards, postmortems and finger pointing right now. And I think that's just such a terrible mistake. I think that postmortems on who should have done what differently. Like, oh, Merrick Garland should have done this, and Joe Biden should never run again. Whatever. Yeah, but they're useful only to the extent that they, at this moment, I mean, someday they're useful to sort of think, what did we do wrong? How could we do it differently next time? But the most important thing is making sure that there will be a next time to do it differently. And for that reason, right at this present moment, I think that postmortems are useful if and only if they lead us to sort of immediately actionable insights about what we need to do urgently right now. Otherwise, it's just self-indulgence to sort of spend your time saying, oh, I knew we should have done this other thing 2 years ago or 6 months ago. So what? I don't care. What do we need to do now?
Well, I've heard a bunch of those kind of postmortems. One of the ones I've heard, Ed, is that there's nothing Kamala Harris could have done because the American people just wanted to change, and that every once in a while there is a change election. And the advantage the Democrats have right now is that in 2028, it's going to happen again because Trump's not able to run again in 2028 unless he changes the Constitution, which is, I think, impossible for him to do. And so he's not really going to, he's not one of these guys who's going to care that much about the legacy issues. And the Democrats, I've already heard people like, well, this is Gavin Newsom's big chance. It's 24 hours later. And I just saw a story. Pete Buttigieg is going to the Institute of Politics at Harvard to study implications for the presidency and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, oh my God, we're already into this. And, there's something to laugh at about this. But having said that, there's also something positive in it. And that is the enormous resiliency of the American people. Their sort of belief in next elections, their beliefs in the process, their ability to sort of be challenged and to immediately start focusing on solutions. Does that give you any hope?
Yeah, I think this is Gavin Newsom's best chance. Is just a line from Veep. There needs to be a new season of Veep. It's like Trump's won, democracy's on the line, perfect for 2028. What I hope that resilience and optimism, of what is now, I think, probably quite clearly a minority of the American people, at least in this context, is borne out, and that 2028 is a free and fair election. I just don't know at this point. If you're right that Trump will not try and bend or suspend the Constitution and run again, then Vance would be probable nominee in 28, and Vance just isn't Trump. He's just not the same kind of charisma as a political actor. And therefore, it might well be a great democratic opportunity. I would I agree with everything Rosa said about postmortems. I do think, though, in terms of Democrats rebooting, they need to understand what they got wrong. And that things are going to happen quickly. Trump is going to overreach. If he gives Elon Musk a quarter of the fiscal cutting power that Musk claims Trump has promised him, he claims very improbably that he would cut $2 trillion from the federal budget, a third of the budget. Well, that would be an immediate sort of suicidal move by Trump. You get anything sort of like that cutting into Social Security. This is not what people think they voted for. Then you're going to get opportunities coming thick and fast. And I do hope that when the postmortems are sort of gone through, the idea that we weren't Berkeley enough, that we need more campus in the Democratic Party, will be killed once and for all. And that you do need economic sort of narrative that appeals to people. Trump had a multiracial blue-collar coalition voting for him. That for the center-left party is an existential middle finger. So they've got to understand the sort of centrality of economics and stop preaching to people. Stop moralizing the whole time. I do think that's an important
agree with that. Totally agree with
postmortem.
And that's an immediate lesson. That's an immediately actionable lesson, and it's about tone and it's about substance.
Absolutely.
Yes, it is. Although I would say, just as a footnote, that as we look at the numbers from yesterday, There was some thought that Trump had gained with black males, and he didn't actually. But he did with Latin males. We've been having this conversation a long time. I was thinking that, Kamala Harris would win and we would have to gradually distance ourselves from deep state radio, the whole concept behind it, and move to something blander because we wouldn't have Trump to sound the alarm about anymore and nobody would know what the deep state is. But we have just been assured of 4 more years of people talking about the deep state. And four more years of relevance of this particular discussion and of informed expert views as a key part of opposition or collaboration in a constructive way in a national dialogue. And that's what we'll be here to do. And we will continue to be here to do it with you guys because we've been doing it for like 10 years. So for now, thank you, Rosa and Ed and David, for the past 10 years. I guess I look forward to the next 4 or 8 or 10 more of having to continue to deal with these issues. Thanks to everybody for listening too. And please come back. There's going to be a lot to discuss. I hope that was clear as a result of this discussion today. Bye-bye.